When we think of a factory assembly line, we naturally picture, like, physical
Right.
things.
Heavy, tangible things.
Yeah, exactly. Car parts, maybe. You have the steel chassis, the engine block coming down the conveyor belt, the doors getting bolted on.
A fresh coat of paint.
Right. It's this highly measurable, deeply industrial process, just putting pieces together until a totally uniform product rolls off the line and, well, into a showroom.
It's visible. I mean, that's the key right there. You can track every single weld, every bolt.
Yeah, you can point to the raw materials on one end of the building and then the finished sedan on the other.
It's basically the ultimate triumph of 20th century manufacturing.
It really is. But what if I told you that the most profitable, most culturally influential assembly line of the 20th century didn't manufacture cars?
Okay, color me intrigued.
Right, like it didn't make refrigerators or televisions or, I don't know, washing machines. What if I told you it manufactured, well, intimacy?
Intimacy.
What?
Wow.
Yeah. It manufactured longing. That very specific, deeply human feeling of being perfectly, intensely understood by someone else.
I mean, that sounds like a complete paradox.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, because we are so conditioned to think of human emotion, especially romance and longing, as the one thing that absolutely cannot be engineered on a mass scale.
Exactly. We view love as spontaneous, like it's organic and intensely private.
Right. So to suggest that human desire can be structured and, optimized like a Model T Ford is, well, it's almost uncomfortable to think about.
It is the absolute definition of a conceptual collision. But, that conceptual collision is exactly what we are unpacking today on this deep dive.
And we have some incredible source material to guide us.
We really do. We've got our hands on this brilliant, incredibly dense German cultural study. It's titled Elvis Presley, Liebe und Markenmacht.
Which translates to Elvis Presley, Love and Brand Power.
Yes, thank you. And let me just set the table for you right out of the gate here. This is not a standard music history lesson.
Definitely not.
We are not doing like a basic timeline of chart-topping hits or tour dates.
Right. If you're looking for a standard biography of a rock and roll singer, this material goes in a completely different, much more sociological direction.
Which is what makes it so fascinating.
It really is. We are going to look way past the sheer hysteria of the screaming fans. We're looking past the velvet suits and the guitar riffs.
To examine the hidden mechanisms of fame.
Right? Exactly.
Yep.
We are going to analyze how a singer's vocal cords, his management structure, his private relationships, and even his eventual death were systematically engineered.
Engineered into what the researchers call a love brand.
A highly profitable entity, yes.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because whether you are a diehard music buff or just someone totally fascinated by how modern influencer culture works, this study is a total revelation.
It really connects the past to the present.
It absolutely does. It proves that the monetization of parasocial relationships didn't just start on social media.
Right, that weird modern feeling that a celebrity you follow online is your actual real-life friend.
Yes. That wasn't invented by YouTubers or like Instagram models. It was perfected in the 1950s. We are using Elvis today as the ultimate blueprint to understand the modern celebrity economy.
The central thesis here is that we have to stop looking at love merely as a private, ephemeral feeling.
Okay.
We have to start looking at it as a cultural commodity, a product.
Wow, just straight up a product.
Yes. In the case of Elvis, romance was produced, packaged, and sold in multiple overlapping formats.
So not just the song.
No, it was sold in his lyrics, obviously.
Okay.
But it was also sold in the physical timbre of his voice, the specific way he moved his body, the highly formulated plots of his films.
And the fans too, right?
Exactly. Perhaps most crucially, in the active, labor-intensive fantasies of his fans.
I want to stop right there and just really dig into this concept of the love brand, or Liedsmark in the original German.
It's a very powerful term.
It is, and the source material makes this really bold, almost contrarian claim. It argues that his primary economic value wasn't actually his music.
Which is a huge claim to make about a musician.
Right. When you say it out loud, it sounds absolutely crazy. We are talking about one of the best-selling musical artists in the history of the world.
But the study says, no, the music was just a delivery mechanism.
His true value was his status as this love brand.
It completely shifts the entire perspective. The study actually positions him as the great transitional figure of the 20th century.
Transitional in what way, exactly?
Well, he represents the exact moment in pop culture when we move from classic entertainment to the modern celebrity economy.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the difference?
Think about classic entertainment. You pay for a ticket, you sit in a theater, you watch a performer tap dance or sing, you applaud the skill, and you go home.
Right. The transaction is over. You bought a performance.
Exactly. But in this new celebrity economy, you aren't just buying a performance, you are buying a relationship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the absolute genius of the system built around him wasn't just that he was an authentic, talented guy from Mississippi. It was that his management and the media apparatus were marketing the illusion of authenticity.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So they are selling the promise of personal, intimate closeness to millions of people simultaneously.
You've got it.
But the catch, like the brilliant, profitable catch, is that he never actually closes the distance. He is everywhere, but he is completely unreachable.
That is the exact paradox that makes it work.
You know, when I was reading this part of the study, my mind immediately went to modern internet culture.
Oh, it maps on perfectly.
It really does. I look at platforms like Twitch, where streamers sit in their bedrooms and talk to a chat for 12 hours a day, or Instagram creators who do those get ready with me videos.
They are literally selling access to their private lives.
Exactly. You subscribe, you pay a monthly fee, you get behind the scenes content, maybe they read your screen name out loud on a stream. It feels incredibly intimate.
It feels like you really know them.
Yeah. And what this study is saying is that Elvis was basically the analog pioneer of this exact psychological model.
Precisely. He just had to do it with vinyl records, fan magazines, and concert posters instead of a smartphone camera.
That is wild. The underlying psychological mechanism is identical, only the technology has changed.
And to pull this off on a mass scale, whether we're talking about 1956 or today, the public persona has to be carefully molded so that the star acts as a projection screen.
A projection screen, meaning they can't be too rigidly defined.
Right. You cannot be a highly specific, rigid personality. He couldn't just be one thing to one demographic. He had to be a mirror.
So different groups could see what they wanted to see.
Exactly. Completely different groups of people had to be able to look at him and see whatever it was they desperately needed to see in their own lives.
And the study breaks down these different projections, which is where it gets really fascinating because they are completely contradictory.
Well, totally at odds with each other.
But somehow they all coexisted at the same time. Like,
Oh.
to teenagers, he was the symbol of youthful freedom. He was rebellion. He was dangerous.
But then, to young women, he was the absolute pinnacle of heterosexual attractiveness and raw sexual tension.
Right. And then at the exact same time, mind you, to older, more conservative demographics, his PR team marketed him as a symbol of family-friendly decency.
The good Southern boy who loved his mother.
Exactly. The guy who bought his mom a pink Cadillac who was unfailingly polite to his elders.
And then, when he was drafted into the Army, he became the patriotic, respectable soldier doing his duty for his country without complaint.
There's just so many different hats to wear. And humming underneath all of those loud public personas was this projection of a vulnerable, lonely boy.
Yes, a sensitive soul that made people, especially women, want to nurture him and protect him.
But how does a human being hold all of those contradictory images together without the public calling him a fraud?
That's a great question.
Like, if a celebrity tried to be the dangerous rebel, the wholesome mama's boy, and the military patriot all at once today, they'd get ripped apart online for being inauthentic.
They probably would. But the projection wasn't about logic. It was about fulfilling emotional deficits in the audience.
Fulfilling deficits. So people ignored the contradictions because they were getting what they needed.
Exactly. And if you connect this to the broader economic picture, you can see why this multi-layered projection is a masterstroke.
How so?
Well, if you are only a dangerous rebel, you might have a passionate cult following, but you completely alienate the mainstream middle-class market. You can't sell records to parents.
Right, you get boxed in.
But if you are only a polite, clean-cut family man, you lose the passionate, youth-driven hysteria that actually drives mass cultural movements.
So by holding all of these contradictory images in this delicate, carefully managed balance, the Love brand just maximizes its consumer base.
The audience simply doesn't care about the contradictions. They're only engaging with the facet of the brand that serves them.
That makes so much sense. You don't just buy a record because you like the melody. You buy access to the specific feeling you are projecting onto him.
Buying the physical record becomes a symbolic act of closeness with the version of the star you need.
But that raises a massive question for me. Like, you can have all the brilliant PR and magazine covers in the world. You can tell people he's a rebel or a mama's boy.
Right.
But how do you convince a teenager sitting in her bedroom in 1956 that this untouchable, millionaire global icon is intimately connected to her.
You have to deliver it in the product.
Exactly. You can't just do that with a poster. You have to engineer that feeling into the actual sound waves coming out of her record player.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating technical aspects of the entire study, the engineering of audio intimacy.
This part blew my mind.
It's incredible. When most people think of his early career, they usually picture the chaotic rock and roll energy.
For sure. They think of the shaking hips, the fast tempos.
Right, the sheer physical uproar that terrified parents on national television.
The wildness. That's the cultural footprint we all remember.
But the sociological study emphasizes something deeply counterintuitive. It argues that the fast rock songs were the spectacle, but the ballads,
Oh, the ballads.
yeah, the slow songs, they were the true economic engines of this brand. The ballads were where the intimacy was manufactured.
And the study breaks down what it calls the acoustic micro level. I really want to get into the weeds on this because it's just brilliant.
Let's do it.
When he sang these ballads, he used very deliberate, almost microscopic vocal techniques. Like, he would elongate specific syllables.
He would slightly delay his phrasing, hanging just a fraction of a second behind the beat of the music.
Yes, and he used this incredibly soft, fragile breath control, almost letting his voice crack with emotion.
The result of those micro decisions was profound. It didn't sound like he was standing on a stage belting out a song to an auditorium of 5,000 screaming people.
No, it sounded entirely private.
And the audio engineering of the era worked in tandem with his vocal delivery to enhance this.
Because studio technology was evolving rapidly right then, wasn't it?
It was. Microphones were becoming incredibly sensitive. By using specific studio techniques, like adding a precise amount of analog tape reverb.
And bringing in those incredibly soft, almost humming backing choirs.
Exactly. Plus, deliberately reducing the instrumentation so his voice sat completely isolated and up front in the mix. The producers created what the study calls an intimacy effect.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this a little bit because it sounds almost like a conspiracy theory.
I know it does.
It's like, are you saying that audio engineers in the 1950s guys in short-sleeve button-downs working with heavy analog tape machines were deliberately psychoanalyzing teenage girls and mixing the vocals specifically to manipulate them?
It's a very valid question.
Is there proof they were doing, or did it just happen to sound good on the radio?
The study addresses this tension directly, actually. The line between organic art and calculated commerce in pop culture is entirely blurry.
So it wasn't a master plan.
It's not that these engineers were sitting in a smoke-filled boardroom rubbing their hands together saying, let's manipulate the youth. It's about the evolution of the medium.
Okay, I'm listening.
They understood a physical phenomenon called the proximity effect.
The proximity effect.
Yes. When a singer leans in very close to a sensitive ribbon microphone and sings softly, the microphone artificially boosts the low-frequency bass tones in their voice.
Oh, interesting. So it physically changes the sound.
Exactly. It creates a warm, resonant, incredibly close sound. It mimics the exact acoustic experience of someone whispering directly into your ear.
Oh, wow. So the producers and the singer intuitively recognized that this specific vocal intimacy triggered a massive emotional response.
Right. It made people stop what they were doing and really listen. And once capitalism recognizes a technique, that triggers a massive, profitable response.
It captures it, refines it, and mass produces it.
Precisely. So it's less about a cynical master plan from day one and more of a feedback loop.
They did it, it provoked an insane reaction, and so they just doubled down and turned it into a science.
Exactly. When you put that vinyl record on your turntable, the acoustic illusion, the actual physics of the sound, tricked your brain into feeling like he was sitting on the edge of your bed in the dark, singing directly and exclusively to you.
That is just wild to think about.
A sincere, authentically felt musical performance can simultaneously function as a highly calculated, optimized commercial product. They are not mutually exclusive.
And the economic payoff of archiving that specific feeling is what the text calls catalog value, right?
Yes, catalog value. It's a crucial concept here.
I want to spend some time on this idea of catalog value because it really changed how I think about music catalogs today.
It's highly relevant to how the industry works now.
This study makes this brilliant point. When an artist records a high-energy, topical protest song or like a really trendy dance track tied to a specific fad, it has a shelf life.
It belongs to a specific cultural moment, a specific year.
Exactly. But a masterfully engineered ballad that simulates pure, unadulterated intimacy, that doesn't expire. It is modular.
It becomes immortal because it captures the raw architecture of a universal human emotion.
And because these ballads successfully bottled that intimacy, they can be endlessly recycled.
Decades after the original recording sessions, these exact same vocal tracks are licensed for the first dance at weddings.
They are dropped into the emotional climax of romantic movies. They are played during moments of heartbreak.
Because the intimacy was permanently archived on magnetic tape, which means the Love brand can continue to generate millions of dollars in revenue long after the 1950s context is completely gone.
So we have this beautifully engineered audio intimacy. It gets pressed onto millions of records and sent out into the world, and it creates this incredibly intense reaction in the listener.
A very active reaction.
Right, it actively transforms the audience. They aren't just passively listening to a song while doing the dishes or driving to work. They are activated.
They become an emotional workforce.
Which leads us to one of the most vital concepts in this entire study, parasociality and the emotion work of the fans.
To really grasp this, we need to define parasociality carefully.
Please do, because it gets thrown around a lot online today.
Right. A parasocial relationship is a one-sided psychological connection. It's when a person feels a deep, subjective, and intensely personal bond with a media figure.
Like a celebrity or a fictional character, or hey, maybe a podcast host.
Exactly. You feel like you know them, you care about their well-being, you defend them, but they have absolutely no idea who you are.
It's totally one-directional.
In the 1950s, the millions of fans, who were predominantly young women and teenage girls, who formed these bonds with this specific star, were almost universally dismissed by the mainstream press.
Oh, they were mocked relentlessly.
They really were.
If you look at old newsreels, the male reporters are always smirking. They just call them a mob of crazy, hysterical, screaming girls who have lost their minds.
They were patronized, absolutely. But the sociological study entirely reframes this narrative. It argues that these fans were not just a hysterical, mindless mob. They were the fundamental, load-bearing economic foundation of the entire multi-million-dollar brand.
The load-bearing foundation. I love that.
The fans were performing what the researchers call emotion zarbate.
Which translates to emotion work.
Yes, emotion work.
I just really love that framing because it validates what they were doing. What did that work actually look like on a daily basis?
It was incredibly labor-intensive. These fans were actively dreaming about him. They were spending hours writing him highly personal letters that he would never read.
They were organizing local fan clubs, right? Electing presidents, holding meetings.
Exactly. They were obsessively tracking his daily life, buying multiple copies of the same record to ensure it hit #1 of the charts.
Wow, buying multiple copies. That's dedication.
They were generating the sheer volume of attention, the cultural heat that gave the Love brand its monumental financial value. Without the unpaid emotion work of teenage girls, the brand does not exist.
You know, think about modern stans today.
It's the exact same mechanism.
It is. You have fans of major pop stars who will coordinate on social media to stream a new single on mute while they sleep just to inflate the Spotify numbers.
Right. They will relentlessly defend their idol in the comments section against any criticism.
They act like an unpaid, highly motivated marketing department and crisis PR firm. And this study is saying that exact dynamic was happening in 1956.
But to keep that massive, unpaid emotional workforce engaged, the management couldn't just leave them alone. They had to actively manage the relationship.
The study calls the strategy intimacy management, right? Or controlled openness.
Yes, and it is a notoriously difficult tightrope to walk. Think about it from a management perspective. If you hide the star completely, if you make him a total recluse.
The fans eventually get bored, the parasocial bond starves, and they just move on to someone else.
Exactly. But on the flip side, if you expose everything about his life, if you show him waking up, burning his toast, getting into petty arguments, the mystery vanishes.
The grand fantasy is basically ruined by the mundane reality.
Precisely. So what do? You feed the fans a highly calibrated, heavily processed diet of information.
A steady, repeating loop of carefully selected stimuli.
You give them regular, tightly controlled television appearances where he performs the hits. You release staged press photos showing him looking thoughtful or reading a book or smiling with his parents.
And you leak those sanitized, endearing reports about his private life to the teen magazines, like what his favorite sandwich is, what kind of cars he likes, how much he respects his mother.
You give them building blocks. You hand them just enough raw materials so they can go back to their bedrooms and construct a rich, vivid interrelationship in their minds.
But the key is that you combine that curated intimacy with absolute structural unreachability.
Yes, the unreachability is paramount. He is surrounded by bodyguards. He lives behind the iron gates of a sprawling mansion. He is a global icon who travels in private planes.
That specific combination, perceived emotional closeness, paired with insurmountable physical distance, creates a stable loop of unfulfilled desire.
And unfulfilled desire, as the study points out, is perhaps the most powerful and enduring economic engine in the world.
Because as long as the desire is never actually consummated, the fan will keep buying things trying to close the gap.
That is the core of the business model.
When I try to wrap my head around how powerful this was, I try to think about what it actually meant to buy a piece of merchandise back then.
It wasn't just a basic transaction.
No. If you were a 16-year-old girl in 1956 and you saved up your babysitting money to buy a record or a glossy fan magazine, you weren't just paying for a piece of vinyl, you were buying a piece of identity.
The purchase was a medium of social positioning. It was a communication tool.
Exactly. It's identical to a teenager today buying an overpriced hoodie from their favorite YouTuber or, carrying a tote bag from an indie band.
Wearing that merch is a signal to the world and to yourself about who you are, what you value.
It's an act of buying belonging. You belong to the exclusive club that truly understands this artist.
But the study goes even deeper than that. It speculates on why this intense need for belonging and emotional release was so particularly vital for young women in the 1950s.
Right, the historical context here is absolutely crucial.
It is a vital sociological point. The 1950s, particularly in America, were an era defined by incredibly rigid gender roles.
Strict patriarchal family hierarchies.
Yes, the societal expectations regarding how a young woman should behave, how she should dress, and what she should aspire to were intensely confining.
So for a teenage girl, expressing raw sexual desire, visceral rebellion, or intense, unladylike emotional longing was heavily sanctioned in daily life.
You couldn't just scream or lose control in your suburban living room.
So the love brand becomes the pressure valve.
Exactly. The fan culture surrounding him provided a socially insulated safe space.
Screaming at the top of your lungs at a concert or sobbing over a record in a bedroom with your friends became a permissible, collective outlet for desires that were otherwise culturally forbidden.
The brand didn't just sell music. It essentially monetized their desperate need for emotional emancipation. It gave them permission to feel.
Wow. But here is where the business side of the love brand runs into a major problem, doesn't it?
It does. Raw, unchecked teenage desire is incredibly powerful, but it's also chaotic. It's volatile.
And from a corporate, long-term business standpoint, volatility is dangerous. It's a massive risk.
A brand built entirely on the screaming hysteria of youth might completely burn out the moment those teenagers grow up, get married, and move to the suburbs.
If the brand is going to survive decades, it needs to be tamed. It needs to be broadened and made safe for the massive adult middle American mainstream market.
Which brings us to a fascinating and highly calculated pivot in his career, the domestication of the rebel.
The domestication of the rebel. And this involves two major pillars, right? The introduction of Priscilla and the transition to the Hollywood machine.
Exactly. If we track the trajectory of the Love brand as an economic entity, the introduction of Priscilla Bewley into the public narrative and the subsequent massive shift into making formulaic Hollywood movies served a very specific, vital function.
The study describes this as a deliberate process of domestication and risk reduction.
Yes. When we talk about domestication here, we mean taking the wild, dangerous, sexually provocative rock star who terrified politicians and putting him into a socially acceptable, easily digestible box.
In the early days, his dangerous sexual energy was his primary selling point to the youth.
But it was also a massive liability with older consumers, conservative media outlets, and corporate sponsors.
Because you can't sell laundry detergent or family sedans with a guy who looks like a threat to the moral fabric of society.
You really can't. So his relationship with Priscilla and their highly publicized eventual marriage acted as a narrative bridge.
It allowed the media and his management to tell a completely new story of transition.
He was no longer the dangerous, hip-thrusting threat. He was maturing. He was settling down. He was transitioning into an established, morally safe, relatable family man.
The study actually uses the phrase romantic infrastructure, which is so clinical but so accurate.
It perfectly describes the function.
The marriage wasn't just treated as a private, intimate bond between two people. It was utilized as a structural pillar of his mass market appeal. It proved he was safe.
And this domestic safety in his personal life was mirrored absolutely perfectly in his professional choices at the time.
You mean the massive pivot to Hollywood?
Yes.
Yeah.
He essentially stopped touring and made over 30 movies in about a decade.
And let's be totally honest here, we aren't talking about avant-garde cinema. He wasn't doing Marlon Brando or James Dean character studies.
Far from it. The sociological study analyzes these films not as cinematic art, because they generally aren't, but as a brilliant, highly standardized transmedia franchise.
Long before we had the Marvel Cinematic Universe or endless Fast and Furious sequels, this was the center of a formulaic production model.
The movies were essentially interchangeable vehicles designed for one purpose: to sell the persona and the accompanying soundtrack album.
I want to break down this formula because it's hilarious how rigid it was. If you've seen one, you've almost seen them all. What was the blueprint?
They featured exotic, colorful, but ultimately non-threatening locations. Hawaii, Acapulco, a carnival.
Right, and the plots involved very light, easily resolved conflicts.
There was always a harmlessly flirtatious romantic subplot with a beautiful co-star, usually involving a minor misunderstanding that gets cleared up.
And of course, there were multiple conveniently timed musical numbers where he sings to a dog or on a boat or at a beach party.
It's the ultimate comfort food. The audience knew exactly what they were going to get before they even bought the movie ticket.
There was zero risk of seeing him play a truly dark, irredeemable villain. He was never going to play a character that died a tragic, bloody death.
You were paying for a predictable, satisfying emotional resolution.
Which is exactly why it was so incredibly lucrative. The Hollywood formula transformed individual, volatile musical hits into a serialized, visually stunning, and entirely safe consumer experience.
It lowered the cognitive load for the audience.
Yeah.
They didn't have to think, they just had to bask in the brand.
It broadened his demographic reach immensely, securing the older audiences who wanted light entertainment while continuing to sell millions of soundtrack albums.
But I want to circle back to the marriage, because the study brings up a concept that I think is incredibly relevant to how we view celebrity culture today.
Oh, the power asymmetry.
Yes, it talks about power asymmetry and celebrity pairings.
So when we look at the narrative of his relationship and marriage to Priscilla, how does that story change when we analyze it through today's sociological lens versus how it was presented in all those glossy magazine spreads in the 1960s?
It is a stark contrast. In the 1960s, the PR machine presented this as the ultimate glamorous fairy tale romance. The king of rock and roll and his beautiful, devoted bride.
It was sold as the American dream realized.
Yeah. But today, the study uses modern reevaluations, recent critical biopics, documentaries, and sociological critiques to fundamentally shift the perspective.
Today, it is viewed as a profound case study in power dynamics.
The most obvious being the age difference when they met. She was a young teenager, and he was a grown man and an international superstar.
The age asymmetry is a major, undeniable factor.
But the study looks beyond just the age gap to examine narrative control and institutional power. You have a global superstar backed by a massive million-dollar corporate machine, a legal team, and a PR department.
And you have a very young woman brought into that highly controlled, isolated environment at Graceland.
The study suggests that this relationship demonstrates how celebrity cultures structure, limit, and ultimately consume private bonds.
Because the relationship was inherently required to serve the overarching economic needs of the love brand.
Exactly. She had to look a certain way, act a certain way, and fulfill a specific public role to maintain his image as the safe patriarch.
It is a prime example of how public relations and market demands overrule the realities of private intimacy.
The modern sociological lens doesn't necessarily erase the genuine affection that may have existed between them, but it absolutely refuses to ignore the immense structural inequality and power imbalance of the pairing.
It's a very sobering way to look at something that was sold to millions of people as a pure fairy tale. It reminds you that the product is never the whole truth.
Never.
But to execute this massive, industry-shifting transmedia strategy to take a raw, unpredictable Southern rocker, market his sexuality to teenagers, tame his image through a highly publicized marriage, and pump out a decade of formulaic, highly profitable Hollywood movies, There had to be a mastermind behind the curtain.
Someone was definitely pulling all those economic levers.
Because the star himself wasn't sitting in a boardroom drawing up these multi-year media strategies. And that brings us to the architect of the brand, Colonel Tom Parker.
Colonel Tom Parker. You simply cannot analyze the business side of the story without confronting the man who built the machine.
He was officially his manager, right?
He was, but the study makes clear that manager is far too small a word to describe what he did. Parker engineered the entire overarching architecture of control, merchandising, and licensing.
He had a background in carnival promotions, didn't he?
He did, and he was the one who fully realized that human emotion could be systematically turned into hard cash.
The strategy outlined in the study is brilliant, but it's also a bit ruthless. It was based on a deliberate, engineered paradox, simultaneous scarcity and omnipresence.
It's a fascinating balance. How do you make someone everywhere and nowhere at the same time?
Exactly. How did he do it?
Well, Parker ensured that the image of this star was ubiquitous. His face was on the cover of every magazine at the grocery store checkout.
His songs were playing on every radio station across the country. His movies were in every local theater. You couldn't escape the idea of him.
Yet, at the exact same time, physical human access to the person himself was incredibly artificially scarce.
Parker rarely allowed him to give unscripted, deep-dive interviews. He didn't mingle with the public.
And famously, Parker refused to let him tour internationally. This combination meant that the only way for a fan to satisfy their intense, daily desire to connect with him was to buy something.
You couldn't meet him, so you bought a proxy.
And Parker made sure there was always a proxy to buy. The merchandising strategy was completely unprecedented in the history of music.
It wasn't just selling a t-shirt at a concert. We are talking about an absolute flood of products.
Charm bracelets, branded lipstick in specific shades of pink, glow-in-the-dark portraits to hang in your bedroom.
Sneakers, record players. If they could slap his name on it, Parker sold it.
Because Parker understood margins. The profit margin on a piece of branded plastic is often higher than the margin on a piece of art.
The study explains that Parker relentlessly favored any business model that guaranteed predictable, low-risk, high-yield income over anything that involved artistic experimentation.
If a cheesy movie soundtrack with mediocre songs was mathematically guaranteed to sell 1 million copies to a captive audience, Parker would choose that every single time.
Over letting him take a year off to creatively experiment with new sounds in the studio.
Exactly. In this corporate framework, love and artistic expression are not free, organic things. They are stabilized, measurable market signals.
So let me ask the question that always comes up when people talk about this history. What does this all mean for the artist himself?
It's a complicated legacy.
We almost universally hear Colonel Parker painted as the ultimate villain of the music industry, like a greedy parasite who trapped a generational, once-in-a-lifetime talent in bad contracts and terrible, embarrassing movies just to make a quick buck.
Does the sociological source material actually support that purely villainous black and white narrative?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great question. The study actually takes a much more nuanced, complex stance. It actively warns against simple hero and villain narratives in cultural history.
Okay, so it's not totally black and white.
On one hand, yes, the source material explicitly acknowledges the exploitation. Parker created a system of immense contractual asymmetry.
He eventually took an unprecedented 50% of their earnings, right? Which is unheard of in modern management.
And Parker's total aversion to risk, keeping him in the Hollywood bubble for years, arguably stunted his artistic growth during the 1960s.
A time when the rest of the music world was going through massive revolutionary changes with bands like the Beatles and Bob Dylan.
Right, so the exploitation and the artistic confinement are undeniable realities.
Absolutely.
However, the study balances this by pointing out a harsh reality. Parker was an unparalleled visionary promoter.
Without his relentless, system-building, carnival barker approach to marketing, there is a very real chance the artist might have remained a regional rockabilly star.
He might have had a few massive hits in the South and then faded away into obscurity like so many others.
Parker built the global phenomenon. He built the cage, yes, but he also built the throne.
Furthermore, the study makes a crucial observation for our modern context.
Yeah.
We shouldn't just view Colonel Parker as a historical anomaly or a unique monster. Because his strategies insisting on total brand control, aggressive cross-platform merchandising, prioritizing franchise security over artistic risk, are the exact foundational blueprints of today's entire celebrity entertainment industry.
He didn't just manage a singer. He invented the modern pop culture corporation.
That is a wild, sobering thought. Think about massive influencer empires today, or huge K-pop agencies, or even huge Western pop stars.
Every time a pop star today launches a branded perfume or skincare line, or does a multi-million-dollar tie-in meal with a fast food company, they are executing the exact playbook that Colonel Parker wrote.
But Parker's absolute, unwavering obsession with predictable, low-risk, high-yield revenue eventually led to the final, and perhaps most complex and tragic, evolution of the brand.
And this is the shift to Las Vegas, the era of the love machine and the nostalgia economy.
This shift to Las Vegas in the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s represents a profound transformation in the Love brand.
The study describes this era as a definitive move away from the spontaneous, unpredictable, youth-driven hysteria of the early years.
And toward a highly ritualized, highly repeatable experience economy. This is where the brand stops selling youthful rebellion and starts selling the nostalgia economy.
When we think of Vegas in that era, the image is burned into the global consciousness. We think of the white jumpsuits,
The massive bedazzled capes, the karate kicks on stage,
the wiping of sweat with silk scarves and handing them to fainting women in the front row. It was overwhelming spectacle.
and that immense spectacle was structurally necessary. The study details how these residencies at the International Hotel were engineered.
We were talking about enormous, elaborate costumes, massive backing bands with horn sections and gospel choirs.
Entirely fixed set lists that rarely changed,
Yeah.
and spectacular stage design.
What this massive production did was transform the individual, intimate, bedroom-listening parasocial love of the 1950s into what the study brilliantly terms a collective effect community.
A collective effect community. Let's break that down.
Please do.
It means you aren't just a teenager sitting alone in your bedroom listening to a record anymore. You are an adult sitting in a massive, opulent showroom surrounded by 2,000 other adults.
And you are all participating in a shared, highly choreographed emotional ritual. You are consuming the experience together.
And crucially, what they were consuming had fundamentally changed. The study argues that the audience in Las Vegas was no longer really consuming him as a contemporary, boundary-pushing artist.
They were consuming the memory of their own past feelings.
They were looking at the man in the jumpsuit on stage, but they were feeling the emotions they felt 15 years earlier in high school when they first heard those early ballads.
Because memory is often the most reliable, powerful consumer motive in the world. It's incredibly potent.
I compare this Vegas era to modern legacy acts playing massive stadium tours today.
That's a perfect comparison. You think about these heritage rock bands or even massive pop stars doing retrospective Eras tours.
When a fan pays $300 for a stadium ticket, they aren't paying to be challenged by experimental, difficult new material.
No, they are paying for the safety of recognition. You want the band to play the hits exactly as they sounded on the record 30 years ago, so you can close your eyes and feel exactly how you felt when you were young.
When your whole life was ahead of you. That is the core engine of the nostalgia economy.
It is highly profitable precisely because it is so reliable and repeatable. But the study also points out the deep duality and the inherent tragedy of this specific era.
On one hand, these Vegas shows were a showcase of immense, undeniable professional stagecraft. His vocal power in those years was astonishing.
He was an absolute master of commanding a room.
But on the other hand, this highly routinized, physically demanding schedule performing 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for weeks on end was a symptom of bodily wear and tear.
The human being was being relentlessly ground down by the unyielding demands of the machine he had become.
The Las Vegas routine stabilized his image and generated massive, reliable income for Parker, but it came at a severe, ultimately fatal, physical and psychological cost to the man inside the suit.
It's the ultimate tragic consequence of being a stabilized market signal. A market signal isn't allowed to sleep. It isn't allowed to get sick. It just has to keep signaling.
While Las Vegas successfully stabilized his image for an older, predominantly white, middle-class audience, to really understand the full scope of this study, we have to take a step back.
Right. We have to address the complex and often uncomfortable foundation of where his immense cultural power came from in the very first place, before Vegas, before Hollywood.
That's an essential part of the text.
Now, before we get into this next part, I want to frame this very carefully for you listening. The source material we are working from tackles a deeply complex debate that is still raging in cultural studies today regarding cultural appropriation.
We are going to analyze the sociological text provided. We are not taking or endorsing a political side, but rather we are presenting the historical viewpoints exactly as the study lays them out.
Because it's absolutely vital to the economic history of the brand. How does the source text weigh his genuine musical influences against the systemic inequalities of the 1950s market?
It is a critical, unavoidable section of the study. The text explicitly states that his status as an object of desire and as a massive global brand was not culturally neutral.
His music was a fundamental blending of country, gospel, and black musical traditions.
Specifically rhythm and blues, which he grew up listening to and admiring in Memphis. And he brought this blended sound to the masses within a highly segregated market and a legally segregated society.
The study uses two specific academic terms here: cultural translation and body politics. Can you explain how the researchers define those in this specific historical context?
Certainly. Cultural translation, as the study uses it, refers to the process where he took styles, vocal techniques, and emotional deliveries that were rooted deeply in black musical traditions and translated or brought them into the mainstream white market.
Because he was a white artist, the mainstream radio stations, television networks, and record labels afforded him a massive, unprecedented level of reach, visibility, and profitability.
This was a level of systemic access that was systematically denied to the black artists who had actually pioneered those very sounds and techniques.
And the body politics part, how does his physical movement tie into this?
That refers to his physical performance on stage, the sexualized dancing, the hip movements, the raw, uninhibited physical energy.
The study argues this was a controlled provocation, right?
It was deeply threatening and shocking to the conservative white mainstream. Initially, it was seen as a dangerous crossing of cultural lines.
But because of his race and the brilliant management structures we discussed earlier with Colonel Parker, the mainstream media eventually found a way to sanitize it, frame it as harmless youthful exuberance, and monetize it on a massive global scale.
So looking at the dual perspective the text offers, how does it balance these views?
Because in modern discourse, you generally have two entrenched camps: people who say he stole everything and was purely an appropriator, and people who say he was just honoring his heroes and breaking down racial barriers through music.
The study carefully outlines both sides of this ongoing historical debate, refusing to reduce it to a simple binary.
Okay, so what is the first side?
On one side, it notes the argument that he was deeply, genuinely respectful of his influences. He openly acknowledged the gospel and R&B artists he admired, often attending their shows and praising them in the press.
This perspective argues that musical crossover and blending are the natural, organic evolution of all art.
And that he was a musical revolutionary who helped introduce mainstream audiences to sounds they would never have otherwise heard, thereby helping to slowly break down cultural barriers.
But the study also presents the systemic counterargument.
Yes. The counter-argument emphasized by the study focuses not on his personal intentions or his heart, but on the structural economic reality of the market at the time.
The market was racially segregated.
Therefore, regardless of his personal respect or love for the music, the economic benefits of this cultural translation were vastly inherently unequal.
The immense generational wealth, the brand power, and the global legacy generated by this cultural blending flowed almost exclusively into the white-dominated corporate structures.
To Parker, to the record labels, and to the estate. The text concludes this section by stating a complex reality. These two truths exist simultaneously.
He functions as both a symbol of genuine, passionate musical revolution and a stark, undeniable example of unequal, racially structured market dynamics.
Both perspectives are absolutely necessary to understand the full scope and origin of the brand's immense power.
That is a really profound, mature way to hold both of those historical realities at the same time without diminishing either one.
It's the only way to really understand the economics of the era.
And this immense cultural footprint, which, as we've spent all this time dissecting, was built on borrowed musical traditions, mass market domestication, intense parasocial intimacy, and a relentless nostalgia machine.
It meant that the brand had achieved something almost impossible in capitalism.
It had become too big to die, even when the human being at the center of it tragically passed away at just 42 years old.
Which leads us to our final fascinating concept from the study: the posthumous brand and the digital age.
It is a slightly morbid but economically fascinating reality. The study points out that his sudden death in 1977 did not end the Love brand.
It merely forced it to change its format.
The physical person, the unpredictable human element, was gone. But the economic entity continued entirely uninterrupted. In fact, it grew.
The primary physical example the study gives is Graceland. The mansion transformed from a private, eccentric home into what the text calls grief infrastructure.
And I have to say, grief infrastructure might be the most dystopian, brilliant phrase I've ever heard.
It's incredibly descriptive. Think about the mechanics of how we process loss as a society. When a beloved, monumental figure dies, there is a massive outpouring of spontaneous, chaotic public mourning.
People don't know what to do with their feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The absolute genius of the posthumous brand management, led by the estate, was to take that chaotic, unorganized grief and institutionalize it.
They gave it a physical location, Graceland was open to the public, and it became a highly choreographed emotional interface.
You buy a ticket, you get in line, you take a guided timed tour through the jungle room, you see the jumpsuits behind glass.
And at the end, you are funneled into a massive gift shop to buy a commemorative t-shirt. You are given a physical space and a physical transaction to process your parasocial loss.
They literally monetize the mourning process. And the sociological study makes a fascinating, almost unsettling point here. Death actually stabilizes an iconic brand.
How so? It seems like losing the star would be the biggest risk to the business.
Because a dead star can no longer age. They can no longer make a mistake. They can't give a controversial, unscripted interview.
They can't star in a terrible movie that flops at the box office. They can't gain weight or do anything to contradict their carefully curated mythic image.
They are permanently frozen in time. The estate management act as supreme curators of history. They decide exactly which version of him the public gets to see and remember.
They highlight the glamour, the charity work, the iconic television performances, the beautiful young man.
And they quietly, systematically file away the darker, messier, tragic aspects of his final years. They sanitize the narrative.
And today, that brand survival has moved far, far beyond physical tours of a mansion in Memphis. Today, the brand survives and thrives in the digital age.
We are talking about billions of streams on Spotify.
We are talking about massive, stylized Hollywood biopics. We are talking about holographic, immersive concert experiences in London where a digital avatar performs for live audiences.
The study argues that the modern digital landscape reduces his incredibly complex, messy, brilliant history down to easily digestible, algorithm-friendly short codes of emotion.
It calls this phenomenon format-capable nostalgia.
Format-capable nostalgia is a vital concept for the internet age. It means that the deep, complex essence of the star has been distilled down into a mere vibe.
A mood, an aesthetic.
Something that can be seamlessly, frictionlessly dropped into a 15-second short-form video or curated into an evening chill streaming playlist.
The streaming algorithm doesn't care about the exploitative history of Colonel Parker. It doesn't care about the nuance of cultural translation or the segregated market of the 1950s.
It only cares that a 10-second snippet of a ballad triggers a high engagement rate and keeps users on the platform.
This raises a massive question for me, and it's something I really struggled with while reading the conclusion of the study.
What's that?
If we are just slicing this person up into tiny algorithmic vibes for a streaming platform, or turning him into a heavily stylized, fast-paced aesthetic for a 2-hour biopic, aren't we losing the actual history?
It's a very real danger.
Is the modern consumer, say, a teenager today who discovers a song on a viral video? Are they actually connecting with the person, or are they just interacting with a digital ghost, a hollow projection?
The study shares your exact concern. It highlights this danger using the term context loss.
Context loss.
Yes. Platform logic, the way digital media demands quick, frictionless, context-free consumption, absolutely keeps the brand alive and keeps it incredibly profitable, yes.
But it achieves this survival by actively curating out all the messy, vital human conflicts we spent this time discussing.
The management exploitation, the complex racial dynamics,
Yeah.
the deep tragedy of his health crises, and the physical toll of the Vegas years, all of that is sanded down by the algorithm.
What remains is a perfectly smooth, romantic surface. It is a highly effective, deeply profitable digital product, but it is a historically hollow one.
We are connecting with the echo of the love brand, entirely stripped of its human cost.
Wow, okay. That is a heavy but incredibly necessary perspective to end on.
It really brings the whole study into focus.
Let's try to bring this massive journey all together. We started by looking at the microscopic level of a singer's vocal cords.
How the slight delay of a syllable and a soft breath into a studio microphone created a revolutionary acoustic illusion of intimacy.
And we traced how that micro-level intimacy was recognized and weaponized by management.
We saw how it was stabilized by Hollywood formulas and a highly publicized marriage.
How it was shielded and amplified by a segregated market, and how it was ultimately transformed into a global, multi-generational franchise powered by unpaid parasocial love.
And eventually, algorithmic nostalgia. It truly is the ultimate blueprint of how human emotion, our deepest desires for connection, are seamlessly integrated into capitalism.
It is, and the big takeaway for you listening to this right now is that this deep dive isn't just about music history. It's about the world you live in today.
It's the water we swim in.
The next time you open your phone and you see a massive pop star launching a branded makeup line, or you see a legacy rock band doing a massive residency in Vegas, or you watch a celebrity relationship dominating the news cycle with carefully timed, exclusive paparazzi photos.
You need to realize that you are looking at the exact step-by-step playbook written by this phenomenon.
The love brand is everywhere. You interact with it every day.
It really is the architecture of our modern culture. And to close our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over, drawn directly from the implications of the study we've unpacked.
Let's hear it.
We've seen how intimacy and nostalgia were engineered and standardized in the 20th century using analog tools. We see how they are seamlessly, posthumously licensed by estates and digital algorithms today.
Right.
If a brand can so perfectly simulate a human relationship and sustain it for decades after the actual human being is gone, in the near future of the celebrity economy, with AI and digital avatars, will we even need human pop stars at all?
Oh.
Or will the industry just manufacture the format-capable emotions directly, completely bypassing the methy, fragile human beings that used to create them?
Which brings us right back to the assembly line we started with. Only this time, there's no unpredictable human being required at the center of the factory floor.
Just the perfect, frictionless machinery of the human heart, perfectly tuned, algorithmically generated, and ready to be sold.
Thank you for taking this incredible deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.